Okay, good morning, everyone. Let's
Morning.
make a start on the first panel for the joint Lower Saxony Scotland Forum for this year. So the forum this morning is concerned with research and the challenges, tensions and opportunities with respect to funding that we face in the coming years ahead of us. I should begin by introducing the panel this morning. First of all, myself, my name's Bill Cushley, and I'm the Assistant Vice Principal International at the University of Glasgow. You should have been looked after this morning by Professor Suzanne Lieb, who is the Vice President for Research and Humanities at Leuphana University. However, she has a family emergency to take care of, and we should bear her in our thoughts today as she faces that little challenge. The four panelists who will be taking forward the work today are Professor Bridget Vessels from the University of Glasgow, and she's interested mainly in social and cultural changes in the digital age and the dynamics of social inequalities in digital societies, looking at cultural participation, debates about Industry 4.0, and framing her research around smart public and 5G. We have Professor Tim Bedford, who's Associate Principal for Research and Innovation and Professor of Decision and Risk Analysis at the University of Strathclyde, which is our partner institution across the city in Glasgow. And Strathclyde, of course, hosts the only Fraunhofer Centre in the UK. And Tim's particularly interested in ensuring that Scottish researchers are able to continue European research collaboration post-EU exit in Lower Saxony and elsewhere. We have Martin Sauter, who is Professor of Applied Geology at the Centre of Geosciences in Göttingen. His research focus is development of numerical tools, such as the double continuum model, the quantification of flow processes in the fractured porous, fractured unsaturated zone, as well as the characterization of aquifer geometries and hydraulic parameters. And last but by no means least, we have Professor Peter Hecher, Professor of Flight Guidance at Braunschweig, and his research is focused on developing technology, systems and procedures for safe and efficient and environmentally friendly air transport systems. Peter is also Vice President for Research and for looking after early career scientists at Braunschweig, and that's something I'm sure we'll pick up on in the course of the morning. So the framework for the discussion this morning is around cross-border research collaboration and the challenges that it faces going forward, including those that specifically relate to Lower Saxony and Scotland. As David McAllister indicated in his talk earlier this morning, the relationship between the United Kingdom and the EU states adds a particular bit of difficulty into that, and we also face the additional challenges of the current pandemic and the economic and other hits that that's going to provide in the medium term as well. Many institutions also want to reduce their carbon footprint. And again, Peter, we may come to you for a couple of questions around that area, since aviation is the prime culprit in the minds of the general public and many others in contributing to that difficulty. So the evidence is very clear that cross-border collaboration gives research outputs that are of greater impact and greater value to institutions and to individuals. It allows for greater breadth of training opportunities for younger early career researchers and allows institutions to gain from an efficiency perspective, sharing ideas, equipment, and trained personnel. And as an example of this, I'm going to be terribly brave and try to share my screen for a second with an example of how that's been taken forward. Can we all see that? If someone could nod. Good, thank you, Bridget. So there's been a partnership existing for some time between Glasgow and the Institute for Gravitational Research there and the University of Hanover. And it's taken forward work in the search for gravitational waves, and also those participating in it have won prizes. So the Volta Prize from the European Physical Society, an award that's given every other year for significant work in the area of physics and related topics. So I cannot seem to get to the second slide here. The second slide in this set showed mainly the value of such a collaborative activity in bringing together young people. So there's a joint PhD program. The groups have got together in Scotland to work together at a retreat in a small town outside Glasgow, between Glasgow and Edinburgh, and it's had real value going forward. So moving on then, we're in a crisis at the moment. We have Brexit facing us, we have the pandemic facing us, but every crisis also provides opportunities. And what we want to talk about today is how we mobilize collaborative activity, how we find the funding for that, what kinds of opportunities the new digital era brings for us. We might or might not be able to see Scottish and UK universities participate in Horizon Europe going forward, even although institutions in Scotland and Lower Saxony have been very successful in that area. But that's one of the areas I suspect we'll pick up in the course of the conversations this morning. Without further ado then, let's pass over the microphone to Professor Tim Bedford to hear his thoughts on the challenges and opportunities that lie before us. Tim, if we can pass to you, please.
Thanks very much, William. Well, let me start by commending University of Glasgow and Lufana for taking the initiative here. Glasgow, our close partner, is one of the oldest universities in Scotland and indeed the United Kingdom. My university, the University of Strathclyde, is very new compared to the University of Glasgow. We can only trace our line back to 1796 and the establishment of a place of useful learning, the only Scottish university founded during the Enlightenment period. We have a very strong focus on science and technology, and we used to be called the Royal College of Science and Technology, and we see the German model of universities of technology as a great example, especially in your intensive strategic collaboration with industrial partners, your collaboration with research and technology organizations such as Fraunhofer, and the way you develop startups and SMEs in your region. This is something we are emulating with the innovation ecosystem we've been developing. I'm also very pleased to share the platform with my colleague, Professor Hecke, who I was delighted to be able to meet in that far off time when we could actually visit each other's countries. And I was able to visit TU Braunschweig. We're both members of CESA, the Association for Universities of Science and Technology in Europe, and indeed TU Braunschweig is very active in the CESA Task Force on Innovation that I have the honor of chairing. And colleagues from Strathclyde and TU Braunschweig will speak tomorrow about how we're collaborating. And we have many similarities, including our strategic relationships with our respective national measurement institutes, National Physical Laboratory in the UK and PTB in Germany. Now, I can speak from the heart with my own personal experience when I say that international experience as a younger researcher, and I lived in the Netherlands for 14 years and actually visited Göttingen several times for research with a statistical institute there. That can be transformational in terms of broadening your experience, your expertise, and in particular, your understanding that research excellence can be found anywhere, not just in your alma mater. So Glasgow, as was mentioned, has got strong connections with Germany in terms of research. As was mentioned, my university is the host of Fraunhofer UK and hosts the Fraunhofer Centre for Applied Photonics. This has grown rapidly to become a key part of the Scottish research and innovation ecosystem. We have vibrant photonics research at Strathclyde, but also at Glasgow University, Heriot-Watt, St Andrews, and elsewhere working as part of the Scottish Research Pool in physics. And Fraunhofer has now become one of the strongest applied research centres, in particular for quantum technologies in the UK. So let's come to the topic of challenges, tensions, and opportunities with respect to funding. Well, I'm afraid we don't have to look very far at the challenges and tensions, COVID, Brexit, global tensions, etc. But I want to focus more on the optimistic side and look towards the opportunities and the reasons for that continued collaboration. Because the fundamentals of research culture are the values that we share are common. The UK has left the EU, but we've not left Europe. We've not left those commonly held fundamental values of European research culture. Our economic interests are also close, with a lot of crossover ownership of major companies and co-development of technologies. The need to achieve the technological, social, and political changes required to tackle climate change provides probably the biggest and most vital reason to pool our resources and work closely. And in fact, Rachel Sanderson and myself work together to ensure that our two universities provide support to the City of Glasgow in support of its climate change work and in supporting COP26. And this is surely a great opportunity for broader collaboration. Now, when you see the direction of travel in the UK system, then you see that there is actually a substantial amount of convergence between the UK system and the German system. The UK Research and Development Roadmap, which was published on the 1st of July 2020, sets out a strong vision for the development of research policy in the UK, foreseeing greater collaboration between universities, industry, and other organisations in support of research and innovation. The Strathclyde Innovation Ecosystem is a case study in that government R&D roadmap, and it's been achieved by linking Strathclyde research centres with broader innovation partners and hosting many independent research and innovation organisations on campus. Not just Fraunhofer, but AFRC, part of the Advanced Forming Research Centre, part of the High Value Manufacturing Catapult, and in total 4 Catapult organisations being represented across our sites. Collaboration with the Scottish Funding Council funded innovation centres. And in addition to the National Physical Laboratory, we're also a host site for another UK national measurement organisation, the Laboratory of the Government Chemist. We've been building translational research and innovation centres with multiple centres in collaboration with industry, including the Rolls-Royce University Technology Centre, a continuous manufacturing crystallisation centre, which is actually part of the working on the development and manufacturing of COVID vaccines. Our Advanced Forming Research Centre, which I mentioned, and our Power Networks and Demonstration Centre. Working closely with Scottish Government, we lead the National Manufacturing Institute Scotland, which has a main hub at the Advanced Manufacturing Innovation District Scotland, near to Glasgow Airport. And this is opening spokes around Scotland to ensure engagement with regional manufacturing specialisms. So I wanted to paint this picture that, as you know, there are so many aspects of the German system which actually are replicated very strongly within the UK. But now thinking about the future engagement, well, ideally, the UK will be associated to the Next Horizon programme. This is something UK universities are strongly lobbying for, the Scottish Government desires, and the UK Government ministers have repeatedly stated they support, most recently in the roadmap that I mentioned. And if not, then they've promised, again, their support for our third country participation. But there are many potential bumps: the cost of association and whether that is supported by Parliament, the mechanics of third country participation, and whether that proves to be a blockage in the future. However, all these changes have enabled us to really rethink what we want from our international partnerships. And there is a very interesting document that has recently been published by Universities UK International on future international partnerships. I was one of the academics involved in developing the ideas in this document, and I commend it to you. I think it's it sets out in a very strong way the strategic case for enhanced international collaboration in strengthening also our domestic research system. There's a number of key areas which they pick up: prestige talent programs, system-to-system agreements, including more bilateral nation-to-nation agreements on research, and a vision for a comprehensive system, system-to-system agreements, which states clearly that multilateral research programs, of which the European programs are actually the foremost example across the world, that these are the gold standard in international research collaboration. We also there have information around research mobility for researchers and students, support for international university business investment networks, and for enabling international spin-out and startups to create a footprint of the UK. These are merely ambitious proposals for international collaboration mechanisms from the sector, some very ambitious and long term, but we have good hope that some of these proposals will be picked up by UK government. And one of the most recent straightforward proposals, that of allowing international co-investigators on UK grants, was noted recently in a public speech by Ottilie Laser, the new head of UKRI, our national funder for research and innovation. So, to sum up, we have clear strategic reasons for collaboration. We have a common vision for research across the whole range of fundamental to applied research and around its impact on society. And in spite of the current uncertainties, we should be confident that we can find the means and the mechanisms for that collaboration as we move forward. So I'll stop there, William.
Many thanks, Tim. That was great. We move now next to Peter, Professor Peter Hecker. Can we have your thoughts, please, on the challenges, opportunities that lie before us?
Yes, of course. Thank you very much for allowing me to give a little presentation on that. So first of all, thank you, Tim, for highlighting the partnership Braunschweig and Strathclyde have already. If you allow, I would like to raise a few words about the place we are currently in, Braunschweig. Braunschweig University is one of the oldest German institutes of technology, founded 1745. And a little calculation would reveal that this year would be the 275th anniversary. And we were planning for a big party and lots of events across the city, but unfortunately, we had to cancel most of them and translate them into some digital formats. So the Braunschweig area is rich of research organizations, like, for example, the German Institute of Metrology, the German Aerospace Center, and many more. And that helped us, as we are quite a medium-sized university with only 20,000 students, really to establish research areas of a reasonable impact in the fields of mobility, future cities, metrology, and life sciences. But now a little bit back to what I want to talk about, which is challenges, tensions, and opportunities with respect to funding. And I would like to highlight a little bit the European perspective. Why? Because I'm personally strongly involved in setting up the framework programs at European level, and as I'm especially supporting the joint undertakings we have since already 2 framework programs, like, for example, the Clean Sky joint undertaking and the CESAR joint undertaking on aviation-related topics, in which I'm chairman of the scientific committees. Now, let's talk very briefly about challenges, but because Tim correctly said there's not very much we can do about that, I believe the biggest challenge currently is to become and stay connected in an academic environment which is affected by the global pandemic. And we are suffering from a dramatic reduction in personal and institutional exchange. So this affects the personal meetings, the networking, preparing collaboration, joint research and innovation activities at different levels. So first of all, at the strategic level, when it's about shaping partnerships, at research level, when it's about preparing networks and research proposals, and to connect the scientists and researchers. And as I said, at individual level, when it's about researchers and students' mobility. And this is a big pain that we cannot send our students and our researchers to our partner institutions and let them grow by visiting other countries and other cultures. But maybe this is enough about the challenges. Let's talk about the opportunities. And we are in just at the beginning or close to the beginning of the new work program Horizon Europe. And you all know that the strategic planning foresees 3 pillars on excellent science, secondly, global challenges and European industrial competitiveness, and the 3rd pillar is on innovative Europe. And I believe there are big opportunities in the area of new partnerships. Because, as I said before, we are now very experienced in 2 work programs with those strategic partnerships, which have turned out to be very successful. And in the new Horizon Europe, we will have even more partnerships on different areas, which are relevant for Scottish and those universities from Lower Saxony, on health, on digital industry and space, on climate, energy and mobility, on food, bioeconomy, natural resources, agriculture and environment, and other partnerships across themes. So I believe that there are many opportunities to connect with our friends and collaborators in Scotland, and we are already investigating potential options. The second area of opportunities may lie in the European Universities Initiative. I know that in the current Horizon 2020, and in this context, there has been on one hand the Erasmus Plus program, where the strategic partnerships across the European Union between the higher education institutions have been strengthened, and the first two calls have revealed a very big success. In the first call, we had 17 university alliances involving 114 higher education institutions from 24 states. In the second call, even more, 24 alliances with 165 education institutions. And what is very important, as the Erasmus Plus is covering the educational dimension, it is that there is an additional instrument from the Horizon 2020 work program on science with and for society, which is delivering support for research and innovation dimension of European universities. And in the course of this program, already in the first wave, many universities have been awarded €2 million per consortium for establishing collaboration on research topics. Currently, the second call is being evaluated, and I believe it will be a very big success to widen the dimension of collaboration from the teaching and education towards further areas like research. There are two more dimensions of opportunities. The first of those two is the national funding becoming more open. So from the German Research Council, DFG, there's a new call on Arts and Humanities Research Council. There is a UK-German funding initiative in the humanities. Deadline is February 24th, 21. So maybe this will be a platform where we can investigate further funding and options of collaboration. And what has been announced by the ministers before in the introductory session, we are very much looking forward to see how the Lower Saxony Scotland Fellowship Programme may develop in the very near future. Now, what are the tensions, the little drawbacks? One of the drawbacks is certainly the budget. Looking to the very recent CSIR information, we had to recognize that only a limited budget and budget cuts for research in other countries will lead even more to competition. And we are pretty much disappointed that the amount of funding available is reduced, very much reduced compared to what we initially expected. So the final budget for Horizon Europe stands at €84.4 billion, which is significantly less than the €94.4 billion proposed by the European Commission, and far from the €120 billion, which was campaigned for by a broad coalition of university associations, including CSIR. Now, there are many more drawbacks, but I think I should focus on the outlook. I should mention that for Braunschweig University, UK partners still are and will be in the future a key element of our European research and innovation activities. Looking back, the Horizon 2020 partnership, the most of the Horizon 2020 partners for our university are located in the UK, and we are very happy about that. And we will do our very best to continue with this trend and with these statistics and strengthen our collaboration and partnership. We do have long-standing collaborations with many universities, even from Scotland. Just to mention one is the University of Aberdeen, and there will be a workshop tomorrow which will focus on that, on the environmental hydraulics. We are starting new collaborations, like, for example, Tim, with the University of Strathclyde. There will be another workshop tomorrow on the perspectives of future research collaboration. And we are investigating if we can set up new networks along with CSIR to support specific areas, like, for example, aviation and other areas we have common with other Scottish colleagues. And last but not least, COVID, which is a kind of challenge, even offers new opportunities by going online, by using digital formats. So we are currently intensifying the use of online formats, thematic workshops, etc. And we are experimenting there with our colleagues from Strathclyde University. So to summarize, there are a lot of challenges, but there are lots of opportunities, and we have an excellent partnership with our Scottish colleagues, and we are very much looking forward to continue on that. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed, Peter. That was excellent. We now move to Professor Martin Sauer. So Martin, over to you.
Okay, thank you very much. Good morning, everybody. Good morning, Professor Wessels, Professor Kuschley, Professor Bedford, Professor Hecker. I'm very pleased that I'm able to speak in this kind of prestigious kind of panel and to give my thoughts to the, well, generally the collaboration, and also what I wanted to do is actually give you a bit of material, a few examples of our 20+ years collaboration with Scottish University, in particular University of Edinburgh and University of Heriot-Watt University. Well, just give you a bit of an idea of what we have been doing, to give you a bit of a feeling for what type of research we're doing, but also on the type of funding that we managed to acquire in the past, and also give you a bit of an outlook. And what I want to point out to you, I mean, the initial speeches, they concentrated on parallels between Scotland and Lower Saxony. There isn't only a historical, political, I mean, connection between the two, federal states and communities, but it's also a geological parallel there. I mean, there's a geological parallel as far as the architecture concerned and the geo resources. And this is what I wanted to briefly talk to you about, and then share my screen with you. And don't be worried that I've got a 20 plus presentation, but it's a number of pictures and photographs and so on. So I won't bore you too much. I mean, I also wanted to acknowledge my co-author and friend and collaborator, Chris McDermott from the University of Edinburgh, and also the funding agencies and the donating agencies that, well, facilitated our research in the past. The kind of environment we're dealing with is the kind of what we call Geo Reservoirs, which is porous fractured rock formations somewhere at depths between 3 and 4 and 5 kilometers that we investigated with respect to oil and gas recovery, so classical natural fossil resources, but we learned from that, and nowadays you can use all this knowledge for investigating the storage of natural gas, hydrogen and so on, and carbon dioxide, as well as geothermal resources. So in order to put that in some kind of schematic, and we are looking at fluid rock processes, sustainable management of these reservoirs, and geoengineering in these different fields: water, energy storage, geothermal, gas resources, oil resources, and the safe storage of different types of fluids and hazardous substances. So in order to be able to do that, you need to investigate the system as well as understand the processes and be able to model that stuff in order to predict what is happening in the future. Well, it gave it a bit of a blessing in June 1912. I mean, you see some familiar faces. David McAllister somewhere over here, and responsible person from the different universities that met in 2012 for signing the Memorandum of Understanding. At that time, Heriot-Watt University, University of Edinburgh, Technical University of Clausthal, University of Göttingen, represented by myself, and the Energy Research Center in Lower Saxony in Goslar. So, I mean, this was a memorable day outside a very familiar kind of location at the Holyrood Castle in 2012. Talking about the funding, there had been quite a bit of historic funding that goes back to Framework 3. You know, can see, I mean, this is more than 25 years ago, with different types of funding. More recent and current funding, you know, there have been continuous European funding, which was the, let's say, the magnitude, or represented the magnitude of funding. And currently, I mean, coordinated by the University of Edinburgh, it's Dr. Katriona Edelman. It's a sweep proposal that we're waiting for and hope that we will continue our direct relationship. There had been also a proposal funded, not funded, unfortunately, but what I want to point out to you, this is our connection to the University of Glasgow. You might still remember him. This was Professor Paul Younger, an excellent, funny, humorous scientist, well, and good friend. he passed away in 2018. He also put a proposal together, you know, some years ago that already demonstrated the collaboration between Lower Saxony and Scotland. So this is University of Edinburgh, University of Glasgow, University of Göttingen, and LIAG in Hanover. So it was overprinted by a stamp over here. And beyond European funding, there is also funding from Scottish and University of Edinburgh, funding on internal investment, on the development of laboratory equipment and so on, prosperity partnership, and another GeoMecam funding, and also by the German government, by the German Research Council institution. It's a DFG, German Science Foundation, as well as Lower Saxony that was funded large-scale equipment for myself at that time, and we put that together and managed to put together well, a substantial instrument, I think, which is quite normal, which I want to briefly demonstrate to you what had been going on. And summarizing, it has been about 10 million euros of funding over the last 10 years that have been acquired from different sources, and that funded University of Edinburgh scientists, Harriet Yott University scientists, and Göttingen scientists. And it is what we concentrate mainly on is this Geo Reservoir experimental analog technology, which we appreciated as great. I mean, the Scottish and also Paul Younger, he was a great one for developing acronyms, but this one is from by Chris McDermott in this case. And to illustrate to you briefly what is happening, so we're investigating this kind of environment, the 3 to 5 kilometer depth type of georeservoir, for example, for geothermal exploration and management. We need to understand the processes, and we investigate those processes in some kind of laboratory environment. This is the type of samples we're looking at. So this is about 300 millimeters in diameter, so a larger scale sample, which is very unique, and not only that. And this is what it looks like at Edinburgh at the moment, with where we developed the prototype in the past. We also generated a number of products, so a number of publications in prestigious and renowned journals. And also this is what it looks like now in a sketch at the University of Göttingen now, with the samples and so on in the environment. And this is what it looks like in Göttingen. We are just about to complete the material, just to give a bit of an impression. I won't go into the detail because, I mean, time is too precious this morning. And also this is the kind of environment that developed out of this joint collaboration and based on the prototype at the University of Edinburgh and Harriet Watt University. So just to give you a few impressions. And this is the kind of environment that we want to look into future, for example, on the type of problems and joint research topics in the georeservoir type of environment. So it's the investigation of the characteristics, the behavior, and the mathematical numerical modeling with respect to the development of energy resources, geothermal, oil and gas, hydraulic fracturing, which is important, which is a bad word for some of us, yeah, but I think it's still required with respect to developing energy resources, energy storage facilities in order to deal with renewable energies. You know, I mean, you need some kind of buffer in order to store energy. Renewable energies have often the problem with not being, let's say, providing a continuous base load. Disposal, I mean, this is also something we need to deal with, even if we don't like it. I mean, you need to look into risk assessment of these spreading of hazardous substances, and also the generation of earthquakes. This is what we can understand in this type of environment. So we look into process investigation, and once we understand it, we manage to model it into the management of these systems and the respective optimal operation. And we also got a response from also international projects, from industry, from international modeling teams, so the laboratory is open to a larger community. And there is opportunity for funding from the Lower Saxony Ministry, MWK. However, this type of funding is more in order for collaboration and contacts among scientists. And also, I mean, individual funding. I mean, for example, I was given 2 years of position of a researcher, which we lumped together with the University of Edinburgh researchers. So we provide 4 years of funding for a person. And the best of it, I mean, in this case, I mean, you know all the problems to find the right personnel. We already got somebody, a Scottish researcher who will take on the task of putting life in this, continuing life in this collaboration. But what I want to point out is you need more concerted funding, a larger scale funding, more continuous type of funding, especially this kind of environment. And I would like to thank you very much. And for questions, I mean, I'm open at any time, even beyond the scale, the time of this panel.
Okay, thank you very much indeed, Martin. That was excellent. Nice to see something real that's actually come from a tripartite collaboration. So the visual image is worth 1,000 words. So that was great. Thank you very much indeed. Our last speaker in the session this morning is Bridget Vessels. So Bridget, can I pass to you?
Yes, thank you very much, Bill, and thank you very much for inviting me to be part of this panel. I've really enjoyed the previous speakers. I won't waste time saying hello to you all because we're just slightly running out of time. So what I really wanted to talk about in my 10 minutes was really thinking about funding and developing knowledge, but doing so from a researcher perspective. So we've had this kind of high level, which is great, but what does it feel like to be a researcher in that environment? And what I'd really like to talk about is thinking about the interaction and relationships between the environment, the funding environment, and the wider sort of commercial, public sector environment, as well as funding environment, centres of community, scholarly community, research communities, and thinking about our partnerships and our relations amongst scholars and our other partners. And as we sort of, and the reason I want to look at that is partly in addressing some of the challenges. I think the way we can address challenges is by building capacity and resilience. So how do we do that? And I think we do that through really thinking about our community, thinking about bringing young researchers through, building knowledge, building skills, and so on and so forth. So that's kind of the nutshell of how I think we can address some of those challenges. Now, the perspective I'm taking is very much from a social science, humanities, and engineering perspective, but thinking about strong disciplinary strength, but working within interdisciplinary environments. So we've got that sense of interdisciplinarity, and that for me also talks to Michael Gibbons, even though it's criticised, his argument that we've moved to a type 2 knowledge production. So working from SPRU, the Science Policy Research Unit, that shift to research that has more impact, but also is mindful of the scholarship and the knowledge that we're actually developing. So kind of what I'd like to think about as I'm sort of chatting, because I see it more of a discussion than an actual talk, is how we look at knowledge production in terms of the evolving and changing funding environment, and how we as a learning community can work with that, both shaping it through getting involved in research policy, but also understanding how we can work within our communities from early career to professorial level and higher in terms of fostering that resilience and that capacity throughout our organisations. So one of the key things that I'm going to sort of flag up is, you know, how do we use a mixed economy of funding to sort of build that resilience, build that capacity. So what I'm going to draw on in quite a personal narrative is funding gained from the UKRI, from the European Commission, from the fellowship, and from seed funding, and how that supported, I think, me personally, but also my researchers, my PhD students. So what might that feel like? And what I'd like to start with is an undergraduate at matriculation at Durham University, where St Bede has his tomb. Now, St Bede, in terms of English history, was seen the father of English history. Now, in a sense, we know Glasgow, the Scottish tradition is different, and so is the German tradition. But in a way, we situate ourselves within that scholarly community. And I can remember the principal of Durham University saying, you are privileged, you are now joining that scholarly community. So I've always been trying to understand what that is. And I think just engaging and working together is really, where we're coming from. So in terms of thinking about my journey and the researchers I've worked with and how I've interacted as a researcher, but also going into research policy, what has that looked like? What are the resources that have enabled me and certainly my colleagues to undertake research, to fund PhD students and to fund early career researchers? And I think here innovation is important and thinking slightly differently. I was extremely lucky. Those of you who had geologists, we've had scientists. I did my PhD, which was funded by the Economic and Social Research Council at SPRU, the Science Policy Research Unit, and at Sussex, Scotland. It started in the 60s. It was a young university, but it was built around interdisciplinarity. But even SPRU for me wasn't enough. I linked with Culcoms, with people like Robin Mansell, Ed Steinmuller, economists, but also media theorists, cultural theorists coming together. Now, my PhD was funded by ESRC, and I worked in collaboration. It was when digital technology was just going mainstream, early mid-1990s. But even at a PhD level, I worked with the Metropolitan Police, and they, in City of London, had 4 European Commission 4 framework projects. And in doing that research, I started to link in with the European, much more policy-focused research, building links and partnerships, learning how to communicate with the public sector, with the private sector, understanding that policy domain, which is really, really important, as well as that sort of UKRI, ESRC, blue sky, really thinking through the theoretical development. At the same time, I was also part of the EU sort of MTEL, European Media and Technology Network, where again, I learned to engage with scholars and learned to communicate and understand the wider perspective. From that, again, it's working with the knowledge. The knowledge was about how do we work with digital technology? How can that be mainstreamed? Where is it useful? What's the user perspective in that? And how can we bring together development, design, and use to make these much more robust and reliable? Out of the PhD, 2 research questions. So again, it's that knowledge, it's the research question, it's what drives us. And there were 2 questions came out of my PhD. And I was extremely lucky. I got my first postdoc funded by the EU on inclusion, exclusion, a wonderful the scholars from across Europe, very senior scholars, addressed 1 part. And then EPSERC, I finished that, and then EPSERC, again, the much more physical research councils, it was a post came up, exactly that second question. And again, worked very closely, much more closely with computer science, developing that understanding. Alongside that, it was building Scandinavian collaboration around participatory design and working with universities that had that collaboration in place and supported a very early career researcher to do that. And then moving on from that knowledge, going into tenured positions, it was working with that knowledge. So first of all, ESRC funding to develop e-social science, so methodological innovation. And part of that project was working with Max Kraglia, who is now at ISPRA, so those who do geology, in terms of the European Research Centre near Milan. And that link has stayed. But then working very much in developing, how do we develop the methodological tools to support our research, particularly around data, particularly around the digital. Taking some of that knowledge, moving into much more applied funding. So here, Innovate UK and ESRC together. So both close to market, but with ESRC insights in terms of what are the concepts. From that, back into European funding, a big project on open data. So working with different research scientists globally to understand what open data might mean. How do we manage and curate data? What is the ethics of data? And feeding that in very much as an interdisciplinary, much more applied aspect. We've then got funding such as cost networks, looking at mobilities, environment, and social media and social networking. Crucially, that, even though it's not funded, is difficult. A number of my PhD students could take advantage of early career placements, which gave them international experience. And from that, developing a sense of where are we digitally. We've got Web 2.0, we've got AI coming down the line, we've got automation. So what, and sort of where does inclusion fit into that? And here funding, again, looking at AHRC funding, so arts and humanities funding, but working with digital humanities to understand a very large project, to understand how people actually engage with data, understand data, but do that through a lens of, if you like, cultural participation and audience. And here we're working very much developing computational ontologies to work with different types of data. We talk about mixed methods, but working with the humanities scholars, what's coming through very strongly is the granularity of data. A lot of, computer science data is data, but how do we work with that data? How do we train our early career? We know data analytics and working with data is something that we haven't done enough of for our early career researchers, and I think more is needed. Now, of course, those are the EU sort of European Commission, much more applied, and the UKRI, but don't forget our foundations. So currently working on a project with the Nuffield Foundation on Me and My Big Data. So this is very much about looking at people, looking at the ways in which people understand big data and looking at inequalities and knowledge of the ways in which people understand their own data and can learn to work with data. So kind of pulling that together has now sort of brought University of Glasgow into quite a large Institute of Productivity. So this is a UK, an ESRC funded centre, which is an ESRC funded centre for 32 million, which is basically has macroeconomics, it's got innovation, it's got business studies, but it's also got myself very much looking at the social dynamics of inclusion and exclusion in terms of the digital environment. So in a way, what we've brought together is my journey, in a way, represents how the different funding options and support within the scholarly community are absolutely crucial in developing capacity. And through that support I've had, again, I'm ensuring and understanding what our early career and PhD students need in terms of not just their PhD, but understanding the environment, building relationships, building contacts, so building knowledge in that way. Now, I think another key dimension that we need to think about in terms of building resilience and capacity is our involvement in research policy. And I think here we've got people who've worked here with Fraunhofer. I work with TNO, I'm half Dutch, so I've got my Dutch passport, but kind of getting involved within some of the more research policy areas. So the excellent work in terms of RRI that was done in Europe, Responsible Research and Innovation, getting involved with those sorts of issues and shaping that agenda. A more recent example is to get involved with at national level, involved in the ESRC. It was quite a big review and policy development of digital research in the UK. So I think it's building all those pieces up. And in a way, we've talked, excellent presentations about the broader strategy, but being aware that to ensure that there's places to develop capacity. So to conclude, I think we've got three main things to think about. I think ensuring that we keep supporting community, our research communities, however they are configured. Make sure that we can establish and maintain and create new relationships, whether those relationships are through people, through data and ideas. I think it's also ensuring that we enable people at all levels, from early careers through to professorial and at strategic level, to understand and keep working with a funding environment that changes and evolves. And I think just to finish, I was absolutely delighted, and I think it's something that, you know, in terms of what we're talking about collaboration here, the Glasgow strategic sort of research plan going forward has 3 key headers: creativity, collaboration, and career development. And I think when we think about this, it might be a useful way to think about those 3 things in how we develop our partnerships between Lower Saxony and Scotland going forward. Thank you very much.
Okay, many thanks, Bridget. Insightful and thought-provoking as always. Thank you very much indeed. Okay, we now come to the discussion part of the panel. And for the participants more generally, if you look on your screen, underneath the main screen, you'll see 5 buttons. And the one on the extreme right-hand side is marked Q&A. That's where you put questions for the panel. And so the panel and I are going to warm you up. I'm going to pose a couple of questions to the panel while you compose your questions and put them on the Q&A. If by accident you put them on the chat, the joint forum team will transfer them to the Q&A session. So we do want some questions for our panelists this morning. So to kick off, Tim, can I turn to you first? So you have the connection with Fraunhofer. So we've got a very strong academia industry collaboration there. How important do you see those kinds of interactions going forward as providing a consistent level of funding, you know, to take care of the kinds of things Bridget's just been talking about sustaining a community of scholars and interested parties? So how important do you think that's going to be? How do we sustain it? And how do we help individuals who would like to, if you like, break into that arena? How do we help them to take their first steps?
Well, I guess a couple of questions there built into that, a couple of different sorts of issues. I think if we touch on Fraunhofer, I think it's very interesting that there is still only one base in the UK for Fraunhofer. And this speaks to the difficulty of embedding something like that into the UK funding landscape, because we do not really have a mechanism for longer term support for sort of semi-independent organizations unless it fits very closely into the remit of a research council. So within the UK, you have organizations such as NERC, our Environmental Research Council, which has got quite a number of laboratories. EPSRC, which is one of our key funders, they don't do that so much. They do provide some funding to Alan Turing Institute, but really most of their work goes directly to funded research. So when we developed Fraunhofer, actually, it took a lot of effort. The university subsidises Fraunhofer. The Scottish government and Scottish enterprise support Fraunhofer because it has a 1/3, 1/3, 1/3 funding model. Now, that's been then a key investment from different institutions, and of course we're delighted with the success of that. But that points to a real challenge. I do think that the particular model of Fraunhofer, with its academic leader, is a really strong one. So Professor Martin Dawson is not only a 50% professor in the University of Strathclyde, but he's 50% the director, the research director of Fraunhofer. This is a model which has actually not been adopted, not been taken quite as seriously as it should be, I think, by the UK authorities. It's interesting that we get regular visits. When I say regular, I mean not frequent, but every couple of years, when there is essentially, if I could characterize it like this, when there's a new civil servant in Bays who wants to understand why that is different from their existing models. And I think that the power, the speed with which it's grown is based on the power of that model. So it's this is a very good model, I think, which could be further adopted, but it will require UK government to decide that it will adopt that model in UK institutions, and it hasn't done that yet. We'll see how that develops. It may develop further. There may be other opportunities, and certainly we will be very supportive of expansion. To come back to your other point, William, about supporting younger researchers in making headway, you know, I think that's so important these days because of the fact that so much research funding is going into especially multidisciplinary kinds of programs. Now, that means that there's a great challenge for universities to ensure that they have the structures to give new members of staff a very rapid embedding in the to find multidisciplinary collaborators. And I'm reminded of a particular example that we have. So we have a number of strategic themes. If you want to find out what University of Strathclyde is doing, you can look on our website under Work With Us, and you will find under Research, you will find our research not described in terms of our traditional faculty structure. You'll find it described in terms of thematics. So those thematics include measurement science and enabling technologies, energy, health, ocean, air and space, manufacturing, societal policy, and business and entrepreneurship. Now, how does that work? Actually, we have groups of academics in each of those areas, and they're typically mid-career academics who are looking to expand their networks and so on. But this structure, I think, just to show the power of this, we recruited a very brilliant person, a Professor Elisa Moguera, and she very quickly set up a sub-theme within one of these strategic themes. That enabled us to create a huge network very quickly across the university. And actually, as a result of that, she applied for and was awarded a GCRF grant, One Ocean, which is the biggest grant at that point that we'd ever won at the University of Strathclyde. And so that just showed the power of being able to very quickly assimilate all the different people who are not in your own discipline, but are relevant to the impact that you want to have and relevant to the research, the type of research you want to do and the way you do it. So I think it's down to us to think of those kind of creative mechanisms to enable researchers to really blossom in a multidisciplinary environment.
Okay, thank you, Tim. Any of the other panel members want to pick up on anything there?
I think, yes, just thank you.
Go for it, Bridget.
Really great. I was just thinking about that Fraunhofer, and very much, you know, within Europe, there's many more IROs is much more part of that funding landscape and part of that culture. Whereas I think in the UK, IROs are just beginning to come into that funding frame. So I think we've got a different sort of legacy in terms of working with IROs. But it's a really interesting point. Thank you.
Peter.
Yes, if you allow. So I think the collaboration with industry is a very important element. We see at our university, but I guess it's the same across all universities. We are very much technology oriented. That means that we need a strong collaboration with industry in order to deliver our input to the innovation pipeline. So typically universities are doing the very fundamental research, which needs to be taken up by other research organizations or by the industry. And that means that this innovation pipeline needs to be really working and efficient. And if that pipeline breaks somewhere, all parties get into trouble. And therefore, we are continuously lobbying at all levels to provide sufficient funding at the different technology readiness levels, from TRL 1, up to TRL 6. And you even should note that the roles of the universities have changed. So 10 years ago, 20 years ago, universities were strictly limited to the fundamental research, and the higher TRLs were with the industry or with the larger research organizations, and that has changed. So according to our understanding, the research organizations are looking into fundamental research, as well as the universities are even going up to tier 4, 5, and 6. And that means we need a reliable strategy for collaboration with industry. And as I mentioned in my little introductory statement, with many research organizations and big industries around Braunschweig. And it's one part of the mission of our university to establish a long-standing and strategic collaboration. And I think it's the same for other universities, even in Scotland. So it's really vital interest.
Agreed. Thank you very much. Martin.
Yes, I'd like to pick up on one of the comments by Tim, actually, and this is something I have been thinking about for quite a bit of a long time. Strathclyde being organized and also driven thematically rather than institutionally of different types of faculty. I think this could be quite a bit of a model for today's modern university, in my opinion. I mean, new university, for example, in Germany, University of Nuremberg is organized that way. So faculties are important in my respect with respect to organize a course of studies and so on. But as far as research is concerned, I think international collaborations such as ours, with Scotland, or is thematically driven, and I think this could be a real model generally, and also for organization of modern university of, for example, in Munich or Nuremberg. But I think for older universities, which are set in their faculty type of structures and faculty autonomy, they are, in my opinion, a bit more rigid with respect to organizing themselves, effectively.
Okay, so we still have no questions in the Q&A from the audience in general. I'd encourage people to be brave and ask questions, but while we're waiting for someone to step forward, a question for Martin, if I may. So when you were talking about the work you were doing, you said, oh, this is a bad word for somebody. So this is the kind of work that goes around fracking and the views people have about that. So my question is twofold. The question for you specifically is, how do we protect research in an area that has societal impact that is, for reasons that may or may not be correct, usually the latter, how do we protect that research when the funding might be subject to negative comment in the media or the public at large? So how do we protect, in inverted commas, unpopular research?
Yeah, I think in general we have to be open, transparent with our stuff. I mean, I was involved in some kind of mediation process as far as fracking is concerned. I mean, that was in 2011, 2012, when the whole thing boiled up, and to a certain extent. The research was about risk assessment of, trying to quantify the risk that stems from hydraulic fracturing operations for shallow groundwater system. So you need to be transparent. And I think what I kept repeating myself, that research and science could be a platform to discuss these things, and that is the kind of level you need to discuss these with, not the any kind of what do I want to put? Frequently there are initiatives that people say that you are biased with respect to being your funding. For example, if the funding partly comes from some kind of oil and gas industry. So in that respect, you are straight away put into some kind of corner, and but I think, especially as far as research into virus research at the moment, which is very relevant. I think we need to be very open, and we are trained that we need to present our stuff, that we also are trained that we need to question our results again and again in order to optimize our findings. And I think in that respect, if we train people to a certain extent, I don't know whether this is wishful thinking, to discuss on that level, if somebody challenges you, I mean, they should discuss you on that level, on the scientific level, with numbers, with computational, experimental kind of results. Okay. And I think that way we are protected in a way, and then nobody can now tells you, okay, you are biased or put questions with some kind of questionable kind of comments. Yeah.
Okay. Bridget wants to come in on this.
Yes, thanks very much. And I think this really takes us to, it's quite an old debate now, but that whole push for open data and open science. And we know how difficult it's been for the community to take on board that sort of approach. And there's something here about also educating the citizens. So all the debate about the knowledge society and an inclusive knowledge society. So in a sense, when we think of the role of the university is science, research, innovation, and so on, but its other role is education. So in a sense, if we think about, if we can make data open, but we also have to make sure that the environment around that people are educated enough to understand the science. Part of that is also training our journalists, our science journalists, to better discuss and mediate those very complex science methods. And so I think there's something here about looking at some of our processes around open data and open science, alongside how we educate our students going through. It's very, very difficult. The key debate is that most citizens become probably data consumers rather than having the capacity to actually deliberate and engage with that. But I think there's also hope. If we think about very early on in the mid-1990s, the German Green Party raised the issue that actually the environment was a political issue, technology was a political issue. So how do we then sort of get that deliberation onto the table? And again, here different political regimes, some Scandinavian regimes, for example, in Sweden, they have public debate about what universities should be teaching, what research should be going on. So I think there's something interesting there that we could look at. Thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you. We had a question from Daniel Friedrich, and he's just said, oh, Bridget preempted my question by answering it just as I wrote it, and it was views about open data and the like. So if other members of the panel have a view on the topics that Bridget's just touched on, now is the time to answer Daniel's question. And thank you to Daniel for being brave. And another question has arrived. So any other comments on open data and the like?
I think actually, if I may, William, there's of course really interesting developments around industrial collaboration now in the area of open data. Of course, traditionally we've seen a kind there's almost as an opposing movement to industrial research, where the necessity, people think that it's very necessary to maintain everything under strictest secrecy. Actually, the development of artificial intelligence and those kinds of techniques is giving a benefit to companies and a reason for sharing data, because you can create larger data sets which are more powerful in understanding the kinds of issues that you're needing to explore through artificial intelligence techniques. We have a big collaboration with pharmaceutical companies in terms of manufacturing. And actually, one of those key programs is indeed around AI and exploring the kind of data that they're generating from their systems. And this is a multi-industry, a multi-company participation. So those companies are all bringing together their data to enhance the research in a way which was probably inconceivable a few years ago. And maybe I can, I'm not sure if it's okay, William, to advertise a small meeting that we have on exactly this topic.
Very briefly.
Open data and commercialization. It's run by the Technical University of Delft and CSAR, and it's exactly on this kind of topic in relation to industrial collaboration in the 3rd of December, I think.
Okay, thank you. We have another question from Christoph Kleineberg, and he asks, with members of a state administration and a ranking member of the European Parliament present, are there any desires you have for future research funding initiatives that will be set up in future? And I think what we have here, it's not a question for the state administration and the ranking member of the Parliament, but actually it's a chance for you as the panel to say, here are the kinds of initiatives that we would like to see. And perhaps I was just going to come to you, Peter, you got there right before me. It's a day for getting in first. So Peter, let's let you pick up on this one first.
Yes, thank you very much. So it's less in terms of topics. What I would like to propose is more in terms of instruments. because as I outlined in my initial statement, we have experienced a change of funding instruments within the past 20 years. So we had a lot of collaborative research, bottom-up research, which was funded across the different framework programs. And with the introduction of partnerships, how should I say, the architecture of the funding scheme has changed. So those partnerships are very much industry driven, and they are focusing on high TRLs and on industrial priorities. And maybe, and I'm sure that we are currently facing more and more gaps in the low TRL research. We have the European Council funded grants, the ERC grants, which are targeting at low TRL and fundamental knowledge. And as may potentially there will be less and less collaborative research funding, there is coming up a gap in this low TRL area. So we need to connect the fundamental research with the industrial research. And this seems to become very, very difficult, especially in light of the ongoing discussions with Horizon Europe. So my plea at this point would be try to establish a seamless research arena where we can bring things from fundamental research into the industrial environment. We do need the industrial guidance. That is very important in order to deliver relevant findings and relevant research, but we need some playground outside that, not only in the ERC area, but even in other areas.
Okay, thank you, Peter. Any other comments on that one from the panel? I guess an adjunct to that, just spinning the question slightly differently. The playground, as you have it, the playground that's outside the main instrument that protects blue sky research is mainly going to be populated by younger people with new ideas. How might we have an initiative that particularly protects the development of young early career researchers? What instrument is available there?
I think, Bill, it's probably one of the areas in the SRC funding is very much around the funding of research centres. Mm-hmm. So often those research centres have got they're 5 years, and the universities have to then, commit to another 5 years. And it's often through that sort of continuum that PhD students, early career researchers and so on can sort of pull through in an environment where they can discuss some of that. Also, in terms of that notion of the industry, that do we need tech transfer? Do we need the industry sort of collaboration with a social science hat, and also not a humanities scholar, but working with humanities? We also need that critical voice in that arena. So in terms of if we're thinking around, say, developing connected homes, the smart home kind of failed all of that discourse because smartness was seen in the technology and not in the households. So we're seeing a shift now to the connected home, but very much a focus on household, their knowledge, but engaging with the technologies in a particular way. So I think sometimes a centre approach is one way of doing it. I think pathways are really important. And I think, as Tim talked about, those thematic developments at University of Glasgow, we've got often research themes that foster in that sort of pathway through. And so I think, that's one way of looking at it.
Maybe I found something there. So the question was about the early career researchers, I guess, and how we develop them. This, of course, is really the fundamental question for universities. How do we renew research excellence for the future? And I think particularly at the moment, this is in quite a dangerous state, because early career researchers in particular are being very badly affected by COVID. I think there's a danger that many of them will maybe leave the universities because they're concerned about their future and about the funding that will be in the future for universities, and whether indeed universities are good places to make a career. So this is probably a really fundamental issue for us at this time, and I think we all need to lobby government, actually, because government is the only organisation which can support this, to provide much stronger routes for early career researchers. That they are very keen that we provide a good environment, but actually there's now with the amount of support that there is for early career researchers. I do think that there have been some great initiatives in the UK. I'm thinking in particular of the Future Leaders Fellowships that have come out. So I think UK government in particular is in a reasonably good position. But of course, at the moment, everything there's demand on every side for funding, and this is something that we cannot allow to be pushed back to the background.
Thank you. Peter, anything to add? This lives very much in your portfolio at Braunschweig.
Yeah, I cannot more than agree. I cannot do more than agree with Tim. So I think it's very important to lobby. Currently, we are seeing that the public funding will go down in the coming years, even for universities, because of the big burden from keeping up the industry running and the societies alive. So we are already now experiencing a reduction in funding at university level for the next few years. And this will certainly limit the options we can offer our young scientists. So what we currently do is more systematically set up career development plans, entering into more communication with the young scientists, doing big steps in terms of internationalization, because at least at Braunschweig there's a lot of things to do. But the main concern is the funding and the employment opportunities in the future, because at universities, but also at relevant industrial areas, there will be less jobs in the future. We don't see that probably right now already, but it will come. If you look into the aviation industry, you can immediately imagine what will happen there in the coming years. Large companies are cutting down the personnel significantly, and we need to provide an answer, reply to our students who are entering into a certain domain and want to start a scientific career. So it's a really challenging area where we don't have the solution, but we would happy to get into a deeper exchange with our colleagues from Scotland and in Lower Saxony as well, to see how they manage this crisis and what best practices and maybe joint undertakings can be.
Okay, thank you. Martin, you wanted to come in? You're still muted, Martin.
Yes, just to add something that was being discussed right now, and in particular by Tim again. I don't think it's always a matter of funding and money and so on. I think what we should ask of politicians as well, at least it's the case here in Germany, I don't know what it's like in Scotland. Often, I mean, it is being talked about a precarious type of employment if you go to university and if you become a scientist, and especially with these maybe 2-3 year type of employment phases and so on. I think this is something where politics could well appreciate that more. I mean, change their kind of lingo in a way. You know, I think this is, in my opinion, important, at least in Germany. I mean, I don't know what it's like in Scotland. And I think what is important also to have some kind of intermediate funding between different types of projects. And so in my opinion, these 20% overheads, you know, they were given by or 25% by the European Commission to projects, and also, for example, by the German Science Foundation and so on. I mean, it's 20% here and there. I mean, this should be rather used in order to get this kind of transfer between projects. So I think to have young people there, I mean, to get their ideas, and I think this is something we should encourage, that they don't just concentrate on the continuation of the jobs and so on, and so that they have some kind of security, even if it's not permanent employment, but more a longer term kind of employment, so that we can keep them there and get them into universities, and not just large scale research institutions that can offer permanent employment.
Okay, thank you very much. We have another question. Looking at the time, it's probably going to be the last one we take, is the last one on the forum. So Isabella Capelli asks, should universities strengthen their tech transfer activities to increase the potential share of royalties and licensing fees, or is there a risk of becoming too dependent on industry? Who would like to start with that one? Tim, it seems to land squarely on your desk again.
Yeah, no, I'm very happy to speak to this one. You know, I think it's a very interesting question. So we are doing two things at Strathclyde. So one is we are trying to increase the amount of funding we get from licensing. because we have excellent technology which is otherwise potentially not adopted by industry. But at the same time, our big industrial relationships are real partnerships in which we have basically a membership fee to support the research, but that is linked into a royalty-free license. So actually, I would plead for a sophisticated approach by universities in which we see the agreements we make with our industrial partners as part of a much broader question, the broader question of our relationship, the longevity of that relationship, and how we create value together, right? And it's not always appropriate, I would argue, to even bother asking for a license fee. In other cases, we should certainly be doing that. So I like the question, and I think I would plead for a sophisticated approach in which we take a variety of approaches depending on the particular context.
Okay, Martin, you certainly work bumping up against the industrial sector. What do you have from a German perspective?
Yes, I think often, I mean, the type of funding that we get from industry is often, well, we say, okay, secondary type of funding, you know, I mean, industry expects a certain kind of job, like from a consultant engineer. So the consultant writes and does the job as the client expects to. I mean, I support the approach suggested and formulated by Tim at the moment. I mean, it should be collected to a certain extent, that the research that is eventually comes out of the funding, you know, is not associated directly to an individual research and individual industry type, but more towards a generalized kind of answer, you know. And so I think a certain kind of foundation would be perhaps the model, you know, rather than individual direct funding.
Okay, Peter.
Yeah, if you allow, maybe there are two elements of that. So one is the direct technology transfer, which has been addressed now, but you even could discuss startup support, because I guess most of us have young, talented students or researchers who are developing ideas, and we just started in Lower Saxony a program specifically supporting those young entrepreneurs, those young startup companies who are taking the knowledge from the university under special licensing agreements and then transform it into a small and medium, hopefully later medium-sized enterprise. And so I think this is an element which is a win-win situation for industry, society, university. So I think this is something which we are very grateful for, that the government is supporting that, and this should be strengthened.
Okay, thank you. Bridget, anything to add there? I mean, if we're talking about smart households, smart cities, and 5G, your kind of work might be developing products that go into that arena. And how would you like to see a tech transfer operation support that?
I think there's certainly a call from both public sector and actually the private sector in the role of kind of sort of social science knowledge or humanities knowledge in that tech transfer. So BT Research down in Suffolk, for example, are undertaking quite a lot of research in this particular space, particularly around telehealth. And they're really keen, the tech transfer, you know, it assumes as an idea, first of all, it assumes there's a relationship between science, technology and innovation. We know that that relationship doesn't work in a very clear linear way, but often in terms of getting for readiness for market, there is a sense of actually understanding some of the critical attitudes, and it's not beyond market research. So BT Research, for instance, are very, very interested in the kinds of questions they need to ask of this technology. What are the barriers? What are the opportunities? What is the, if you like, industry and partner ecosystem in which this technology can be fitted? So where's the readiness of that technology? So there's quite a lot of interest in that point of view. Another big argument is around the development around smart street furniture, for example. there you've got a very complex notion of regulation, sort of a tech approach to developing more sort of connected citizens in the city space. But then there's also the data sector, and what's the public service role in that, in ensuring people feel it's reliable, secure, and so on and so forth. And there's a number of other examples I could give. So what we're finding is very much a sense of wanting, it's a hybrid, understanding enough of the technology, but also to be able to raise some of the questions around taking that to market. Another example was when we had the mainstreaming telehealth, Philips and some of the big developers, they were very concerned around the uncertainty around health policy in this area. And questions that we had in our industrial panel was, if the policy isn't there, are we really going to invest in this technology? Because we're not sure if that environment is ready. So I think that a sense of a balanced approach with different insights is probably a really good way to go forward, especially as we're going into these new sets of technologies around AI and so on.
Okay. Thank you very much indeed. Any final remarks from the panel? We're now a couple of minutes from the end. If anyone has a final thought they would like to offer, now would be the time. We have no further questions. I think everyone is looking forward to their virtual coffee. So that's been a really enjoyable, vibrant and insightful session. And I would like to offer my thanks to Bridget, Martin, Peter and Tim for their talks and for their very good, clear and thought-provoking answers to the questions. So my thanks to you all, my thanks to the audience, and coffee will be served virtually in your own homes in the next few minutes when we can join together again for a virtual networking session. I'm looking forward to seeing how that works. So my thanks to you all. Enjoy the rest of the conference. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you, William.
So thank you so much for this interesting discussion. Now we are going to go into our virtual lunch break. I will share my screen with you for a moment so that you can see how we are going to do this. Here you are. From 11:30 until 12 in German Standard Time, or from 10:30 to 11 in Scotland, you have the possibility to join our virtual networking room, which you should also have gotten the email for, where you can see the link to log into that room. So if you want to join us, we will then go into smaller groups, have a couple of subjects where we can talk about or just network and have a little chat. And if you don't want to join the virtual networking, we will see at 1 p.m. again in Germany, or at 12 in Scotland, to have our next discussion about study programs and teaching COVID-19 as a game changer. Thank you so much and see you later.
See you later. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.